to this very, very important hearing. We're here to talk about human rights in Liberia today, where we will talk about recent dramatic progress towards establishing an extraordinary criminal tribunal for Liberia, and of course about the next steps in this process. But to recap how we got here, between 1989 and 2003, Liberians suffered through two civil wars in which, out of a population of roughly 3 million people, hundreds of thousands of people were killed, tens of thousands of them civilians butchered in atrocities and war crimes, including mass rapes and amputations. More than 1 million people were displaced. Liberians have not yet seen justice for these atrocities. They have yet, there has not been the kind of accountability and closure that is required. In 2003, a comprehensive peace agreement signed in Accra, Ghana, ended the civil war. It called for the establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or TRC. In 2005, the TRC began its work and in its turn recommended an extraordinary criminal tribunal to be set up to achieve accountability for the war crimes and atrocities that were committed during Charles Taylor's reign of terror. The Liberian Congress passed legislation requiring the implementation of the TRC's recommendation, but the implementation never happened. Years went by. Presidents made promises which went unfulfilled. Notorious war criminals played leading roles in Liberian public life, and a moral fog continued to enshroud Liberia. This year, there has been dramatic progress, and it seems that the fog will start to lift. A new president was inaugurated in January, Joseph Boakai, and he announced that his government would create, quote, an office to explore the feasibility for the establishment of war and economic crimes court to judicially sanction, quote, those who bear the greatest responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Then in April, Liberia's House and Senate jointly approved a resolution calling for the creation of the two courts, quote, an extraordinary criminal court and domestic corruption court for war and economic crimes. On May 2nd, 2024, the president issued an executive order providing for the establishment of an office of the War and Economic Crimes Court for Liberia. Its task is to, quote, investigate, design, and prescribe the methodology, mechanisms, and the processes for the establishment of a special war crimes court for Liberia and a national anti-corruption court for Liberia. The question now facing the office of the War and Economic Crimes Court is this: how best to proceed to establish the court? Many countries have faced this question, from the Nuremberg Court and the International Criminal Court for the former Yugoslavia, and consulting widely on experiences of other countries is simply part of the process in establishing a court to try such crimes. I would note parenthetically that I was very involved with the Court for Yugoslavia. I chaired the Helsinki Commission, and when it looked like that was lagging, offered legislation that did pass, at least in the House, but sent the message that we needed to get money up front into that court to hold Milosevic and others to account for their despicable crimes. We will go into detail today about these and with our very distinguished witnesses. The executive order continues many excellent provisions, and they will comment on the order and offer input, which is so vitally necessary. I believe Sierra Leone's experience is particularly important for Liberia. Sierra Leone had a war crimes tribunal, the Special Court for Sierra Leone, which convicted Charles Taylor for aiding and abetting war crimes and crimes against humanity in that country. This helped that country heal the wounds of its past divisions, and I would note Alan White's testimony will be extremely important here. President Boakai recognizes Dr. White as a trusted advisor and has personally requested him to assist in the establishment of the court. I would also note parenthetically that Alan White played the key role. He was amazing in that court for Sierra Leone in making sure that justice was done to the greatest extent possible, often at great risk to his life. He had so many death threats, and yet he persisted very, very heroically. I believe his assistance and advice will be an integral part of the next phase in this process. Congress has repeatedly recognized the importance of justice and accountability in Liberia, most recently in 2018 through H.Res. 1055, offered by Congressman Dan Donovan in New York, calling for the establishment of an extraordinary criminal court. In 2017, I chaired a hearing of the Africa Subcommittee on the Future of Democracy and Governance in Liberia, And in 2021, this commission held a hearing on establishing a war and economic crimes court for Liberia, with some of the witnesses were there that day, and I welcome them back. In the past, attention shown by Congress to Liberia has been helpful and appreciated by many Liberians. The United States and Liberia have a very special relationship. Liberia was founded by free American slaves and long led by them and their descendants, who both vigorously rejected slavery and all of its evils associated with it, and cherished and developed their relationship with the better aspects of the old country. As Juneteenth approaches, we have occasion to reflect on this relationship and the love of liberty that established Liberia. The responsibility and the opportunity for healing Liberia lies in the hands, of course, of the Liberian people. And we hope the insights and exchanges offered today will be useful to them in that vital work. I'd like to now yield to the distinguished co-chair, Jim McGovern.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everybody. The title of the hearing today is Liberia, Next Steps Toward Accountability for War and Economic Crimes. The topic is timely. Last month, on May 2nd, Liberian President Joseph Boakai signed an executive order to establish an office of a War and Economic Crimes Court for Liberia. The mandate of the office is to investigate, design, and prescribe the methodology, mechanisms, and the processes for the establishment of a special war crimes court, as well as a national anti-corruption court. A war crimes court has been a long-standing demand of the victims and survivors of Liberia's two civil wars. Between 1989 and 2003, as many as 250,000 Liberians are believed to have been killed and 1 million displaced. Horrific atrocities were committed by all sides, including extrajudicial executions, torture, rape, forced labor, and extortion. The 2009 final report of Liberia's Truth and Reconciliation Commission called for the creation of an extraordinary criminal tribunal to address these crimes. Unfortunately, the past two presidents dragged their feet. So to see concrete progress now, 15 years later, is encouraging. This is good news at a moment when there's not a lot of that to go around. Accountability in Liberia is an issue that has historically had strong bipartisan support. The Biden administration is already deeply engaged, led by Beth Van Schok, our excellent ambassador for global criminal justice. I was looking forward to receiving recommendations from our witnesses as to how Congress can best support what will surely be a groundbreaking initiative. I have to say, because I just got the testimonies last night, having read them, I think some of what the public might hear today, in my opinion, doesn't live up to the advertising. It seems to be a clearly kind of coordinated smear job, if you will. Several of the witnesses are going to attack certain human rights defenders and organizations by name. And one will go further and attack the entire human rights movement, as well as Ambassador Van Schok. We will have witnesses that will offer, serious grounded recommendations on the next steps we're supposed to talk about, and I'm looking forward to that. But I think it's worth reminding everyone that accountability requires due process, and presenting allegations that are not substantiated in a public forum in which those targeted have no voice, no opportunity to defend themselves, I think is the exact opposite of what human rights is about. And I think those who engage in that kind of practice, I think, undercut our commitment to human rights. So I want to be clear that some of what is going to be said today, I'm going to take issue with, and I regret that. But without objection, I move to submit for the record a forthcoming statement from the State Department's Office of Global Criminal Justice, an October 2021 press release from the U.S. Embassy in Liberia titled Ambassador McCarthy Commends Hassan Bility Global Justice Research Project, and a press release titled U.S. Federal Court Awards Damages to Liberian Victims of Lutheran Church Massacre, about a Pennsylvania court's historic damages award to 4 survivors of one of the worst episodes of Liberia's Civil War. The survivors were represented by the Center for Justice and Accountability, with support from the Global Justice and Research Project. And with that, again, I thank our witnesses for being here, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now introduce our distinguished panel, beginning first with Dr. Alan White. He's the former Chief of Investigations for the United Nations-backed Special Court for Sierra Leone. As Chief of Investigations, He directed and supervised all criminal investigations of the Office of the Prosecutor. Those investigations led to the indictment of 13 individuals, including former Liberian President Charles Taylor, who was convicted of war crimes and sentenced to 50 years in prison. Dr. White currently serves as co-executive director of the Advocacy Foundation for Human Rights. We'll then hear from Yacindy Martin, who is co-founder and executive director of the Movement for Justice in Liberia. She is also co-founder of Oxygen, a subsidiary of the Alliance of Liberia Women International that provides free education on gender-based violence and educational assistance to underprivileged children and victims of gender-based violence in Liberia. She has coached and mentored many women and children from all walks of life as a community organizer and is the director of the oldest African immigrant community in Georgia, the Liberian Association of Metropolitan Atlanta. We'll then hear from Alvin Smith, who is a criminal justice, homeland security, and counterterrorism expert. He currently serves as the chief investigator for the International Justice Group in Washington, D.C. He's a candidate for Master of Arts in International Relations and Global Security with a concentration on conflict resolutions at American Military University. He has been certified by the United States Department of Defense and other agencies, as Alvin Smith has been deployed with the NATO Security Mission Force Protection as well as with the U.S. Department of Defense. We'll then hear from Michael Rubin, who for nearly 20 years has been a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Mr. Rubin previously worked in the Office of the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon, edited Middle East Quarterly, and taught classes relating to the Middle East, Africa, and Central Asia at sea for the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. He is currently Director of Policy Analysis at the Middle East Forum. He is the author of several books, several dozen academic articles, book chapters or encyclopedia entries, and more than 2,000 opinion essays in U.S. newspapers. We'll then hear from Adama Kiatamba Dempster, who is the United States International Visitors Leadership Program Fellow on Transnational Justice in Africa and the United States. He is a 2023 recipient of the Peace and Justice Award from the Center for Africa Peace and Conflict Resolution at California State University, and is a prominent award-winning human rights activist, director, and global ambassador. He is currently the National Secretary General and co-founder of the Civil Society Human Rights Advocacy Platform of Liberia, and lead campaigner for the Coalition for the Establishment of War Crimes and Economic Crimes Court. We'll then hear from Elizabeth Evanson, who is the International Justice Director at Human Rights Watch, previously an Associate Director in the International Justice Program. Her research and advocacy centered on the International Criminal Court, monitoring the court's institutional development, and conducting advocacy towards court officials and its member countries. She joined Human Rights Watch in 2006 as a Leonard Sandler Fellow in the Africa Division of Human Rights Watch, focused on Uganda. During periods of leave from Human Rights Watch, Liz served as a civil society program officer with No Peace Without Justice, Libya's project, and as the Secretariat Director of the Coalition for the International Criminal Court. I'd like to now ask Dr. Alan White if he could proceed.
Thank you. At the onset, I would like to commend Congressman Smith and co-chairman Congressman James McGovern of this commission. You've been an integral part of supporting this. Congressman Smith has been a strong advocate and voice for the Liberian people in exposing corruption and seeking justice and accountability for the victims of human rights violations. Led by Congressman Smith, we passed House Resolution 1055 endorsing the Liberian Truth and Reconciliation recommendation to establish the War and Economic Crime Court. This is the second hearing by this commission on establishing the War and Economic Crime Court. It's hard to believe, but nearly 3 years ago, the first hearing was held on June 21st, 2021. As you rightly mentioned, a lot has happened since the first hearing. I'd just like to recap. And since that time, the Advocacy Foundation for Human Rights has been working tirelessly to establish the War and Economic Crime Court for Liberia. On November 18, 2023, Joseph Boykai was elected as President-elect of the Republic of Liberia and sworn in on January 22nd, 2024. Because of our 20-year plus international justice experience and support for the establishment of the War Crimes Court for Liberia, he sought the Foundation's assistance. Establishing-
If you could just bring the mic a little bit closer.
Okay, sure. Can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay. Establishing the court is a top priority in the United States, and this was reiterated to the foundation in discussions with U.S. Embassy officials in Monrovia. Since those meetings, the embassy has issued several public statements in support of the court, so we have worked closely with the U.S. Embassy to advance this important policy. The foundation is also assisting the Liberian government establish known modalities for the court by using processes similar to those that were used in the establishment of the UN-backed Special Court for Sierra Leone. By using these international standards, the Liberian court can effectively prosecute war and economic crime court under international law. As you mentioned, the Liberian legislature, which we were there in attendance for that, passed joint resolution with 28 out of the 29 senators, only one abstaining in support of it, the establishment of the War and Economic Crime Court. The House concurred with it and approved it 2 days later on April 11th. President Boykai approved the measure on April 25th, 2024. On May 2nd, as you had mentioned, President Boykai held a press conference in the Executive Mansion in Monrovia before he signed the executive order establishing the Office and War and Economic Crimes Court. It's important for you to know what he said, and I will read a brief portion of his statement. Quote, I invited you all here to join me in consummating a process that will set in motion deliberate action steps towards bringing justice and closure to the scars and memories of our tragic and violent misadventure into the more 14 years of senseless civil conflict. Through several years following the silencing of the guns, we as people have endured downpours of agony, an avalanche of recriminations, and clarion calls from either victims or alleged perpetrators. The conviction that brings us here today is that for peace and harmony to have a chance to prevail, justice and healing must perfect the groundwork. I acknowledge the historic move by our national legislature, both the House of Representatives and House of Senate, to reach separate and then a joint resolution urging the nation to take tangible steps, paving the way to bringing justice, healed and reconciled finality, the issues of that ugly period of our past. The direct representatives of the people spoke their collective and overwhelming vote as they passed the resolution. And so, we must act and act now. As you rightly mentioned, he signed Executive Order 131 on that day, which was an historic day. This office, also as mentioned, will be led by an executive director, which will be soon to be appointed, who will be responsible for facilitating the establishment of the court. The temporal jurisdiction has not been formally established yet. However, under the terms of the executive order, it's likely to hear war crime cases that occurred as far back as 1979 and through October 2003, when the hostilities were formally ending after the Second Civil War. The foundation has worked closely with President Boykai and the leaders in the House and the Senate. They are genuinely committed to establishing the War and Economic Crime Court for Liberia. They have listened intently to the people of Liberia, and under the leadership there's been President Boykai, there's been tremendous process as a result of his leadership. The current government inherited empty coffers by the previous government. It will need help from the international community to establish the court. The U.S. State Department has repeatedly made it clear that it will provide funding and technical support. During the June 2021 hearing, the Commission offered its bipartisan support and called for U.S. funding. U.S. financial support is absolutely critical. The Liberian people want an end to impunity and reestablish the rule of law. The court can afford the Liberian people retributive and restorative justice. Both are essential in order to the nation to heal and move on, like its neighbor, Sierra Leone. Congressman Smith and other members of Congress have publicly been supportive of the establishment of the court. Now is the time for the entire U.S. Congress to be there for the Liberian people and to provide the necessary financial and political support as they did in Sierra Leone. Unlike any other country, the historical ties between Liberia and the U.S. date back to 1822, and to make this endeavor for justice even more significant and consequential. Until impunity ends, those who committed the heinous crimes spanning 2 decades are brought to justice. There can be no reconciliation. Many of the war criminals are senior government officials or elected officials who are still walking freely. This serves as a constant reminder to the victims of the wars and keeps the wounds of war festering. Bringing justice to the people of Sierra Leone allowed the nation to heal and move forward, which has led to unprecedented progress and development. Now is the time for Liberian to experience the same level of justice and move forward with reconciliation. Previous Liberian administrations have failed to stop impunity and corruption and bring justice to the people. Now President Boykai has kept his promise. The U.S. has a unique opportunity to join with an African leader who has the courage and tenacity to stand for justice and accountability. We are working hand in hand with the President, and I'm fully confident that President Boykai has set the Liberian justice on the right course. The establishment of the court must be in the same manner as the Special Court for Sierra Leone by treaty and/or agreement with the United Nations with the authority to prosecute international war crimes and crimes against humanity. The appointments of the prosecutor, registrar, and the majority of the judges must be done by the UN Secretary General to mitigate corruption and coercion and ensure transparency. This will allow the court to reestablish the rule of law and ensure accountability of those who perpetrated death, destruction, and caused a civil war. Also, the executive order requires the establishment of an anti-corruption court subject to domestic jurisdiction and operating and guided by domestic jurisprudence with the power to adjudicate matters involving acts of corruption between 1979 to the present. We have seen the powerful and important justice and accountability is set for victims of any civil war. I saw that firsthand in Sierra Leone, how much it meant to victims to witness powerful people who killed their loved ones be brought to justice. Although the Special Court for Sierra Leone was not a perfect institution, it did carry out justice impartially and transparently and prove that the rule of law is more powerful than the barrel of the gun. Despite the progress achieved in a relatively short period since President Boykai assumed office, now the hard work begins in establishing the court. There will be many challenges and efforts to undermine the establishment of the court. And we are aware of several NGOs who are trying to be involved in the establishment of the court, whose affiliation will be detrimental in doing so for purely personal and financial gain. Some of them have been criminally accused and civilly sued for engaging in criminal conspiracies to maliciously prosecute individuals for war crimes and conspire to suborn perjury by coaching witnesses to lie. One case involves a $15 million U.S. lawsuit for malicious prosecuting for providing false affidavits that led to an arrest of an individual who was placed in solitary confinement for 2 years and 3 months. That defendant was Agnes Reeves Taylor, former wife of Charles Taylor, who was falsely accused of torture and ordering the execution of Amos Bond, a former Liberian superintendent in Liberia. However, Bond is alive and currently living in London. Witnesses have come forward claiming they were coached to provide false statements and false testimony and money in return by these NGOs. Additionally, these NGOs were involved in another malicious prosecution of Jibril Massaquoi, who's a protected witness for me at the Special Court of Sierra Leone. So I know this case firsthand. After testifying for the court, he was relocated to Finland in 2008. In 2008, 2 of those NGOs conspired to maliciously prosecute him and provided false statements to the National Bureau of Investigation and the Ministry of Justice in Finland. Their information was used in an open investigation that led to the arrest of Massaquoi. He was accused of killing and eating people in Liberia in July of 2003. However, there's a problem with that. In October of 2002, he was in my witness protection program. So he never left Sierra Leone, and he was under 24-hour supervision by armed personnel of the Witness Protection Section at the court. Also, during that time, as the Chief of Investigations, I occasionally visited our protected witnesses, including Massaquoi. So I saw him personally myself. So I knew these allegations against him were false. Unfortunately, the Finnish government relied on false statements and information from coach witnesses, and Massaquoi was arrested and detained for 2 years. He went through 2 trials. He was publicly humiliated and pressed based on false information provided by the police and press statements issued by NGOs. During the appeals trial, Massaquoi was acquitted once again, and many of the witnesses admitted that they had been coached to lie under oath and received money from these NGOs. They will be identified later in this hearing. Additionally, there have been 2 criminal complaints that have been filed against those NGOs in Liberia. One with the Inspector General of Liberia National Police and the other with the Liberia Attorney General for conspiracy to maliciously prosecute and conspiracy to suborn perjury by coaching witnesses to lie against them. Unfortunately, the U.S. government is supporting the direct engagement of those same 2 NGOs with the establishment of this war crimes court. Notably, the U.S. government has used services of these 2 NGOs and relying on them for criminal prosecutions in the U.S. and elsewhere. In order to make sure that this is a credible and transparent court, the U.S. government must sever all ties from those 2 NGOs and their affiliates. Further, the U.S. government must ensure that these 2 NGOs and their affiliates are not involved with the establishment or operations of this court. Since the U.S. government supports and works with these 2 NGOs, there must be some oversight of these NGOs and subject to congressional oversight, investigations, and hearings, and perhaps Inspector General investigations for conflicts of interest. Finally, one of the serious problems that we experienced with the Special Court for Sierra Leone was funding. It is critical that this court have a stable and predictable annual budget. I strongly believe that the U.S. Congress needs to continue to be fully supportive of the establishment of this court and provide the necessary funding and seed funding and annual appropriations to make sure the court is viable. Other international donors may assist. However, the U.S. Congress needs to ensure that proper funding is there to avoid negative impact on the operations of the court. Funding of this court is the most critical phase in order to move forward in establishing the War Crimes Court. Congress will play a critical role. Thank you for your outstanding leadership and tireless efforts for human rights around the world.
Thank you very much, Dr. White. That was very, very powerful. And again, let the record again show that the absolutely essential role you played in bringing not only Charles Taylor but several others to justice. So always appreciative of that. I'd like to now recognize Ms. Martin for her testimony.
The chairman and distinguished member of the Tourmalin's Human Rights Commission, United States Congressional hearing. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to acknowledge and thank you for the opportunity to hear our story. 3 years, June 21st, 2021. The story about the Liberian women, children, and the civil crisis. We are forever grateful for this hearing and for this commission. The opportunity to add our voice to the next step. Let me also thank the United States government that gave many of us a second chance and created a safe place for a safe place for us not only to live, but to also grow and develop. This commission has given a voice and a face to the women and children who endure 14 years of horror called the Liberian Civil War. This war impacted every town and village in Liberia. To introduce myself, my name is Yasende Martin Peye. I was born in Liberia. I was a victim of the First Civil War. I am one of hundreds of thousands of Liberians who were victimized by the Civil War and mass atrocity committed during this time. It has been my personal mission to seek justice and accountability for the 250,000 Liberians who were killed and for the victims affected by the Civil War. So today I'm here on behalf of the Movement of Justice for Liberia, a nonprofit organization based in Atlanta, Georgia. Our organization advocates for women and children groups that were disproportionately adversely impacted by the Liberian Civil War. I stand on the shoulder of Liberian civil rights and advocates group that have campaigned for the right of Liberians. Our organization works along with other human rights organizations in gathering grassroots support for the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court for Liberia. I would like to acknowledge the effort of the group that gathered over 300,000 signatures, Liberians across Liberia, and those signatures that show the imminent needs for justice and accountability. Those signatures were presented here as a petition in 2022. Congressman Smith, you will recall on May 22nd, we presented the original petition to you at the step of the Capitol to demonstrate to you the unwavering and unrelenting desire of the people of Liberia for the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court. Those petitions were followed by an open letter to President Joseph Boakai on the potential pitfall of the Executive Order 131. On the occasion of the signing of the executive order to explore the process leading to the establishment of the War Crime Tribunal and an anti-corruption code in Liberia. Some of the pitfalls include others who will try to exploit the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court for personal gain and not for the people of Liberia, which I will discuss later in my testimony. The need for justice and accountability. Today, appearance before you further the effort for justice and accountability in Liberia. I am appearing today to reflect on the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Liberia, the TRC, and to reflect on the war that robbed me of my childhood, the result for which we continue to struggle. The work from the TRC recommended the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court, the WECC, for Liberia, and created a roadmap to the nation of my birth. We are here to add our voice to those of Liberia seeking progression on the work of the TRC. Next step, toward accountability for the War and Economic Crimes Court. Reflection on the Liberian War, or reflection on the Liberian crisis. In 1990, while we were living in Liberia during the war, my mother gathered my siblings and I together and warned us that there were rebels in the country and were fighting a war. They were reportedly coming for the president, Samuel Kanyado. We had gone through horrible experiences during the years of Doe. The streets were turned into killing field, with bodies being discovered as they turned into weeks. As the war engulfed Liberia, children were taken from their parents, drugged, conscripted for killing purposes. Women and girls were conscripted, adopted, and became properties of fighters on both sides of the conflict. At times, we heard cries of men pleading for their lives. Sometimes, I still hear them. I still hear those voices. On July 31st, 1990, I remember when a doctor from the ELW hospital in Monrovia brought to the Greystone compound, an annex of the U.S. Embassy near Monrovia, in our refuge place, a young man who had survived the Lutheran church massacre in Cinco. The survivor, Jimmy, had several wounds that exposed the internal organs. When Jimmy was discovered, he had been butchered and left for dead. After months in Greystone compound, my mother decided it was time for us to leave and seek refuge in the neighboring Sierra Leone. As we tracked out of the compound through Monrovia, the scene was unbelievable. The river filled with young and old bloated bodies, male and female. We encountered soldiers of two rebel groups, children with bloodthirsty eyes, with no human feeling. The scene in the movie Blood Diamond provide male depiction of mine experience. Next, we tracked out of Brewerville, where we were caught in the middle of fight between two rebel groups. After the fight had subsided, all houses were checked, and those that sought refuge from the fight were lined up to be killed. I witnessed an incident where the woman was ordered to be raped by her son. Afterward, she was killed. When the commander returned to the next group, but through some miraculous intervention, the commander, Colonel Vining of IMPFL, called off the execution of those that had been cut and lined up, including my family and me. My story and shared experience are not unique. There are listless Liberians with similar stories. Why I advocate for justice and accountability. This experience has shaped my fight for justice. The experience framed my advocacy for women and children. This experience occurred in the first phase of the Civil War. We believe hopelessness is the enemy of justice. Unfortunately, our people increasingly losing hope. Some of our people are slowly departing from this world without realizing justice for their loved one. In 2020, Tori Wall, an advocate for justice who lost her father, Dr. Victor Wall, departed this world without seeing justice that she so yearned for. And we also lost one of the signatories from the 3,000 signatories, from the 300,000 signatories in 2022. Ms. Deviata Tule, a survivor and a victim, whose 2 children were killed by the MPFL rebels. Her husband beheaded, his core used at a checkpoint while making their way to the IMPFL for help after the murder of her children without getting the justice that she fought for. Equally, the perpetrators of the war are also passing or getting old, and their memories are failing. As a survivor of the Civil War, I experienced the result of human shortcoming, the weakness that people will willingly go through in the name of power. Our witness unimaginable. The extent to which people will exert pain, cruelty, human suffering on vulnerable population for temporary pleasure and greed. Those experiences scar my memory. Although those scars are not visible, their psychological effects will be long lasting. We can surmise that the war was not about the redemption of our people. After the death of Doe in September 1990, the fighting did not end. Instead, other warring factions sprung up. The UNIMO K, UNIMO J, AFL, LPC, the Model, the LDF, the Lord, ATU sprung up, extended the conflict to 14 years. The origin and caution need for justice and accountability. I believe Liberia is at an extremely crucial moment in time. Almost 21 years since the cessation of the civil conflict. You remain our last hope for justice based on our relationship. That is the United States government, the Congress. With you as a leader of the free world, many of the survivors have reached the point of a boiling point. We speak not only for justice that is long overdue, but to protect the future from what the women and children of Liberia endure and continue to endure. I appear today on behalf of Movement of Justice and the women and children to support the process leading to establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court. We seek justice for the victim of Liberia's civil conflict. We seek justice for those who have departed this world, seeking justice for their loved ones in Liberia. While we seek justice and accountability for the victims of the war, we also caution how false allegations and fraudulent processes that attain noble goals and objectives when personal interests supersede national interests. There are individuals and organizations who have accused individuals of committing war crimes, and those cases have been prosecuted. During trial, there were allegations of witness tampering and coaching in 2020. We wrote an article in the Spotlight newspaper questioning those involved in the coaching of witnesses. In one instance, we flew to Liberia and met with Darius Stewart. Mr. Stewart provided an insider account on the practice of recruitment and coaching. Mr. Stewart testified before the war at the Jibril Master Court trial that he had worked along with Mr. Hassan Belidi on fraudulent war crimes trial. We have waited so long for justice, and now we learned that Mr. Hassan Belidi, one who has proven to be involved with this coaching scheme that coach people to provide false information and lie under oath for personal and financial gain, cannot be affiliated with the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court. We are baffled by the United States government. We support Billy and others involved in coaching witnesses to lie and be a part of the court. I urge the Congress not to let the U.S. government to allow Billy or any affiliate to be involved in any way of the establishment of the court, as they will undermine the credibility and to do irreparable harm to the court by turning it from the beginning. The people of Liberia deserve court that everyone can believe is just, transparent, free. People that have been involved in criminal activities.
Ms. Martin, if you could sum up.
Yes, I'm finishing up. I would like to close with this quote from the United Nations Special Representative to Liberia, Jack Lang, in an interview with War Chronicle in 2004. He stated, the poor of Liberia were forgotten for so long. Member of the Commission, you can help us remember the poor of Liberia. Support the establishment of the War and Economic Crimes Court in Liberia to bring accountability. This will provide remembrance of the forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you so very, very much. Mr. Smith.
Yes, sir. My name is Alvin Smith, Chief Investigator for the International Justice Group, based in Washington, D.C. I'm honored to appear before the Chairman, Co-Chairman, and members of the Tom Blanton Human Rights Bipartisan Commission. I would like to personally thank both Co-Chairman Smith and Congressman McGovern of this commission holding this very important hearing as we move forward in discussing the next step towards for war crime and accountability. In your previous hearing, you both supported the establishment of war and economic crime for Liberia in seeking justice and accountability for the 250,000 victims that lost their lives in the 2 civil wars in Liberia. As we will discuss today, the current Liberian President Joseph Boakai has taken the step establishing the War and Economic Crime Court for Liberia. For the past 10 years, I served as Chief Investigator for the International Justice Group. The IJG is a US-based non-governmental organization in the Washington, D.C. area. Joining the IJG, it gave me an opportunity to advance support for the establishment of the War and Economic Crime Court for Liberia. Currently, I work in the global security sector as a United States government contractor with experience in criminal justice, homeland security, and counterterrorism. I hold a master's degree in criminal justice with concentration in homeland security. Recently, I completed my studies for a master's degree in international relations and global security with concentration in conflict resolution. As a global security specialist, I have served in war countries such as Bosnia and the former Yugoslavia Republic, and witnessed the aftermath of war, abuse of human rights, and witnessed war crimes that were committed in that conflict. In support of the RJ mission to Liberia, I have employed my education and experience to conduct investigations and research, document human rights violations and other offenses. The RJG is chartered to conduct many responsibilities, but we have focused on Liberia and reporting on human rights violations war crimes and crimes against humanity, studying and investigating involved parties. We disclosed our funding for the Global Magnitsky Act sanctions in Liberia and other activities. We support the World Economic Crime Code for Liberia and demand justice and accountability for all Liberians. Councillor Jerome Vradio, our executive director, was the former chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of the Republic of Liberia and the major author of the 2009 recommending the court's establishment. Nevertheless, we have received plethora information regarding varieties of NGOs expressing interest to participate in the Liberian War and Economic Crime Code process. These NGOs with my forensic investigative background are being involved with witnesses recruitment, coaching, and paying them to make false statements against war actors. Their process, they will obtain the phone number of the targeted persons, social media information for identification purposes, and addresses. Upon obtaining this information, they will prepare a fraudulent affidavit on oath for the person to be arrested. Darius Tue, an insider witness, provided this information while I was visiting in Liberia, conducting investigation. Darius Tue was recruited, coached, paid by ability, flown to Accra, where he met the British Metropolitan Police team headed by one Gary Tittley. I can provide this information. And he made false statement against Mrs. Agnes Reed Taylor for her rearrest. And after that, Mr. Warner and Mr. Ability provided false statement that Agnes Reed Taylor in 1990 gave instruction. Two different statements. The first one said she shot and killed Amos Bond. The second one, she gave instruction for Amos Bond execution. And another witness was provided called Leo Vavlikane. Leo Vavlikane was provided that Agnes Reed Taylor tortured her during the Liberian Civil War. Based upon those two statements, she was arrested and placed in solitary confinement for 27 months. Upon verification that Amos Bond was alive, and Leo Vavli, because of a false statement, he got granted asylum by the British government in the UK. Maurice Jabate, another witness, also lied on an oath. After the case fell apart, Agnes Reed Taylor got released. Jibril Massacre, a United Nations protected witness by the Sierra Leone Back Code, Benedict gave two contradictory statements against Jibril Massacre. As the case went forward, he added 6 more statement that he was being tortured by Jibril Massacre. In 2002, Jibril Massacre was sent by Police Director Joe Tate in 2002. Joe Tate died in a plane crash in 1999. How can he come from his grave and be able to send Jibril Massacre to torture you? All of the witnesses from the Defense Council cross-examined witnesses produced by Ability and Warner. The witnesses said they were paid to lie. And after the testimony, they will give them the balance payment. Monsieur an American Belgian citizen was lied on for gold running, blood diamond, etc., ability and honor. He was put on trial. False witnesses came forward. Affidavit was full of flaws, and then he so embarrassed he committed unintended death, tantamount to involuntary manslaughter. In my conclusion, with evidence available to the International Justice Group and court records, Ali Warner, a Swiss lawyer, executive director, Civitas Maxima, Geneva, Switzerland, should not come anywhere near this court for Liberia. Mr. Hassan Beneti, executive director, Global Justice Research Project, should not come anywhere near this court. Center for Justice and Accountability, California, Switzerland, they cannot come anywhere near this court. Ambassador Ben Venchak is conflicted. Councillor Jerome Verdier wrote her a letter. You cannot be on the board of these NGOs who are conflicted in lying on people. You have to recruit yourself. She recruits herself on people, but she's still affiliated with them. Thank you.